What up YouTube, TK here, and today on the bench we have the Casio DG-20 digital guitar. I bought this after seeing it in an episode of Flight of the Conchords on eBay and played with it for a little bit, got a little bored of it, and then I put it away, and that's when things went wrong because unfortunately I was careless and I broke one of these string holders. So today we're going to go ahead and fix that. I'll walk you through how this works. Basically, you've got 6 strings, although in my case currently only 5 are operational. When you pluck a string, it activates this little spring switch in here, which tells the guitar you're playing that string. Now, to figure out which note you're playing, there are touch pads under the frets on the neck. So if you press here, it essentially activates a membrane button, and so if you're pressing on this fret and you play this string, the guitar knows to make that note. Fairly simple and also not very good. Part of it is due to age, but the guitar generally doesn't register notes as well as you'd like, and that's a combination of both the poor performance of this membrane fretboard as well as the spring switch method not really working very well. You don't get a lot of feedback and feel out of playing thin nylon strings either. If you want to tighten the strings, all you've got to do is stick an Allen key in here. If you tighten the screw, it pulls this carriage up, tightening the string, and vice versa. We're going to go ahead and undo what is left of the carriage in here and then see how it all fits together and whether or not we can glue it back to this half. See what happens. Oh, this is going to be so easy to fix. Oh, I thought it was going to be hard. Oh, that just made my day heaps better. I thought I was going to have to try and fix it with this lid still on, but that is easier. So you can see basically these just move back and forward. You tighten it up or loosen it off and the carriage moves back and forward. We've got to reattach this to this. Now we don't have a lot of space to glue there, so we're going to have to get a bit creative, but we'll see how we go. You can also see this one's already been modified. They clearly lost the hex piece that went in there, so they've replaced it with this big Phillips head screw. I'm not happy with this hack they've done, stuffing a screw into this instead of the proper hex piece. I'm fine with it being a screw, but it is too tight, so I've just popped it in the vise so I can get some leverage on it and actually undo it, and hopefully I can replace that with a screw that fits better. Yeah, look at what that's done to the screw. That was heaps too big. It's probably ruined the threads. We'll see if we can find anything that fits better. Alright, so we've got another screw here. This one actually fits a lot more nicely without being too big and gouging the threads. We can just screw that in super easily. That's going to be much better. Alright, so what we've got is a metal part here that's fractured on this face. Now if we just try and glue that back together, there's very little contact area. The slightest bit of stress is just going to pop that right off. Now, what would be a really cool way to fix it would be to drill into this metal part, tap it, and then screw this in and glue it in. It'd be a good way to get a really strong fit. Unfortunately, this isn't AVE. I have no drill press. I have no taps. It's not gonna happen. So instead, what we're gonna do is we're gonna glue that like that. We're gonna use epoxy, which is nice and strong, but we're gonna brace it with something to make it stronger. What I've done is I've gotten a lead of a resistor, just wrapped it around and made this little hook, and that is going to give me more surface area for the epoxy to bond to mate the two parts together. So you can see that's just going to mate up like that, and that's going to really improve the joint. Sometimes it can be good to just tack things in place with super glue first, and then you can brush the epoxy on without everything moving around. I've had another idea, because this isn't quite working. We're going to use a jig to hold everything while we glue it. And thankfully we don't actually have to make a jig, we already have one. Here's our jig. We're going to try and do this in place. We've got to be careful when we do this that we don't get glue all over the headstock of the guitar. We just want to get glue obviously on the components that are broken. It's a bit like welding, where you tack weld to get everything lined up and then measure everything, see that it all works, and then you go for the full strength weld. It's a bit like that. I'm trying to get everything in position, hold it temporarily in place. Once I've confirmed that it's going to work, then I can lay on the full strength bonding. And that's what we're going to do. Just start mixing the epoxy up. God damn it. So you can see there the wire isn't really sitting where I want it to. So I'm just gonna mix up some epoxy. I can't really adjust the wire right now because if I do, I'll just break the very tenuous super glue joint. So what we'll do is we'll glue the top to get some more strength so we can then adjust the wire. I have to be very careful when I do this because if I get too much glue down here, the device won't be able to slide in its plastic slot, so you've got to be careful. When you're gluing something like this, you want to key the surface. For example, see this flat metal surface here that I've got some epoxy on? If I really want that to stick, I need to rough it up either with a file or sandpaper or even just gouging it with a nail or something. That basically gives the epoxy all these cracks and crevices to get into, and so the surface area increases massively and you get a much stronger bond. So I've really made a serious error there by not keying it. Alright, so that first run of epoxy is set. It's holding together nicely. We'll just bend that bit of metal back into place. We'll key up that metal surface, and on the other side, you can see this is the side we've glued. Not bad, but this other side we're just gonna key it up real nice. This is gonna make a big difference. It's not so important on the threaded rod. You know, that's got threads, they already give it a fair bit of surface area, but keying the rest of this up is gonna make a huge difference to how strong the bond is. Quite hard to glue at the moment because this epoxy is like liquid. It's almost like water because it's so warm today. Just dab that in there, you don't need a lot. Alright, so we've let that set for about half an hour and it's nice and strong. It won't reach full strength for probably another 12-24 hours, this particular kind of epoxy. We'll go ahead and put it back together. We won't put too much stress on it, but we'll see if it works. So it's the moment of truth. We're going to try out the carriage we just repaired. First we'll go ahead and re-thread it and pop the screw in. Now we're going to be very gentle here because this epoxy hasn't had a lot of time to set. It's 5-minute epoxy, but you generally want to give it at least a few hours before you really stress it out. So it looks like that string is holding. So yeah, we'll just tighten it up a little bit. You may notice I'm having to tighten these up almost to their full adjustment to get them to get anywhere near tight. What I probably should have done is tensioned the string as I was tightening these little lugs on top of the carriages, and then gone for the adjustment with the Allen key, because right now I have them basically loose and then I have to use the entire range of motion to actually get them to tighten up at all. So there's a trick for young DG-20 players. Alright, we're going to go ahead and tighten the one we've repaired. I'm about as scared as you are. It appears to be holding on. I think it's not working. I've got a bit more tension on that now. No, I can see the epoxy moving as I apply tension. I don't think, nah. That's broken again. That's really disappointing. That's a tragedy. God damn. So you can see one of the problems here. When you start to tighten this up to tension it, the fatter epoxy section actually hits here and fouls and starts pulling apart. So that's not good. The other real major crime was I pushed too quickly. I didn't wait for the epoxy to fully harden. I was still doing this while the epoxy was soft. I don't know what I expected to happen. It was stupid. We're gonna let the epoxy set for a full 24 hours this time before we go ahead and test it. We're also gonna reinforce it a little more, just for goodness. I should have realized, you can see that epoxy is still really, really soft. Just, it's not hard at all. That's one way to get the old epoxy off. Good old blowtorch. So as you can see, I've improved this bracing here. I've got it wrapped right around, so that should work a lot better. Now we're going to douse this in epoxy and leave it for 24 hours this time. All nice and coated. Let's let that set. Got that nicely balanced there, so it's not going to glue itself to the baseboard. Awesome. This part is now finished curing for just over a day. It looks nice and tough with its epoxy. Let's go ahead and fit it and see how we go. It's not quite fitting in. I'm just going to have to grind down that excess epoxy, but that should not be a problem. Alright, moment of truth here. We're going to go ahead and see if we can tighten this thing up. It's working! Oh, I think it's falling apart again. Yeah. It's broken. Have you ever heard the saying, there is more than one way to skin a cat? So what we're going to do is loosen this off. We're simply going to glue this motherfucker in place. And then to tension it, we'll just have to pull on that really tight and turn that screw down. It's not going to be as good, but it will still be good. You see, the problem we had is we were trying to resist axial tension with this tiny little cross section here. And the problem is that broke. Then when we went to fix it, all we could do is try and sort of grab around the periphery of this screw thread and then try and bond it to this back section here. It was never really going to work. You know, it's like trying to, grab a hot dog with a slippery pair of gloves on. It's just not going to work. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to glue this deep in here. This is going to rest in this slot, come up against that backstop, so no matter how tight that string is, there's nowhere for it to go. It's going to work way better. I don't know why I didn't just do it in the first place, because generally the better way to do things on YouTube is a quick hack that's good enough, rather than trying to do it properly and wasting 2 days. So we'll just mix up this epoxy and go for it. And just key up the join area, give it all a bit of a scratch. We'll get glue on both mating surfaces. So we've got glue in the slot, we'll get glue on here now. This should be strong as buggery. Alright, so we're just going to put this back together. We don't even really need to wait too long for the epoxy to set, because instead of the epoxy being the main thing holding that in place, the slide is actually going to come up against that bump stop. So when you tighten it, there's nowhere for it to go. It doesn't really matter if there's epoxy involved or not. Should be fine. So we'll pop all these back in and we'll go for it. Uh-oh. There's your problem. Alright, so that's not actually going to work. I'm going to have to space that out a bit more. I didn't realize you can't push those that far back. That is why I'm glad I tried to put this together rather than letting it set. If I had let that set, that would have glued in the wrong position, and I would have probably been kerfuckered. So we know we've got that in a safe position. But the problem is now we've had to slide that forward so there's a gap behind it. But if we just fill that with something, it'll still be awesomely strong. It won't just be leaning on the epoxy. So we've got a bit of nail here. We'll just cut that to size. Safety glasses on. How long do we need it to be? About yay big. Push that in there. And that will act as a stop. So now, that'll have nowhere to go. When we're working with old gear, sometimes we've got to do what we've got to do. We've got it glued in there nice and tight with epoxy. We're going to try and string it up. Hopefully our new bodge fix works. I should have tried this in the first place. Now, it's not going to be as good. But there's not quite playable tension. We're going to have to use some pliers to really yank this hard. See if it can take the strain. That is nice and tight. That's about as tight as I've ever had them on this guitar. And that is holding up nicely. So you can fix the tuning pegs on a Casio DG-20. You just got to get brutal about it. What I really hate about this is that because Casio cheaped out and have this really weedy system for tensioning the strings and this dodgy little system at the other end for detecting when a string is played, it's all very weedy, all very lightweight. It means you can't get any decent tension on the strings. You know that if you've ever played a guitar, you know that playing loose strings is just bloody horrible. It's like trying to juggle wet fish. It's no fun and everyone thinks you're an idiot. It's not perfect, but so little is in this horrible, horrible world. Hope you like the fix. For now, that's me done. TK out.